Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all back here today. Well, in recent weeks, we've been talking about the Bodhicarya Vatara of Shantideva, the way of the Bodhisattva, a guide for the Bodhisattva. And it's really intended to be more or less an instructional manual, but composed in a very pleasing and poetic form, actually composed in verse. We probably miss some of the poetry of it through translation, but I think much of it is apparent. So it's organized along a very traditional line, which is the tradition of the Bodhisattva Paramitas, the perfections, the six perfections of the Bodhisattva. And the six perfections of the Bodhisattva in translation are generosity, ethics or morality, sila is the Sanskrit word, patience, diligence or energy, concentration, and wisdom. And the general drift of it is that, by starting with generosity of spirit and paying attention to these various virtues, that we can arrive at a place of greater wisdom. Wisdom basically being knowing what's skillful and what's not skillful in body, speech, and mind. So the chapter we were in the midst of at the close of the last time we discussed this it's entitled Vigilant Introspection, Vigilant Awareness. And it occupies the place of where you would expect the chapter on morality to be. But interestingly, Shantideva spends a lot of emphasis on awareness of body, speech, and mind as an important element in the practice of morality. So he expands on that as we'll see during some of the readings I'll do today. And I'll start with this one. The rampant elephant, my mind, once tied to that great post, reflection on the teachings, must now be watched with all my strength, that it might never slip away. Those who strive to master concentration should never for an instant be distracted. They should always watch their minds, inquiring, where is now my mind engaged? When this becomes impossible in case of danger or festivity, I'll act as it seems best. For it is taught that rules of discipline may be relaxed in times of generosity. Well, the first two stanzas of this sound pretty exhausting, just constantly paying attention to what your body, speech, and mind are doing. It sounds like it would be hard to just do anything under those conditions. And I think Shantideva, I'm sure, realized that ordinary human beings cannot just do this all the time. But he points to an aspiration to be mindful, to be aware, to remember the teachings, to remember the teachings of the Buddha, to remember the direction of the Bodhisattva, to be of benefit to all beings, including oneself. Keeping all that in mind, to appraise on a regular basis whether your actions of body, speech, and mind are in accord with the teachings and that direction. But then in the third stanza, when it becomes impossible in case of danger or festivity, recognizing that when sudden things happen that pose an immediate threat, you're going to respond in some manner. Or if there is a celebratory mood, you may relax your awareness of it in order to join in the festivities. Or he concludes, it is taught that rules of discipline may be relaxed in times of generosity and when you're involved in charitable activities. Of course, this all requires being honest with oneself about what one is doing and not just giving oneself an out. But the direction is toward continuing awareness of one's actions of body, speech, and mind. He goes on, and when you feel the wish to move about or even to express yourself in speech, first examine what is in your mind. For steadfast ones should act correctly. We might say skillfully or beneficially. When the urge arises in your mind to feelings of desire or angry hate, do not act. Be silent. Do not speak. And like a log of wood, be sure to stay. And when your mind is wild or filled with mockery or filled with pride and haughty arrogance, or when you would expose another's secret guilt, to bring up old dissensions or to act deceitfully, or when you want to fish for praise or criticize and spoil another's name, or use harsh language, sparring for a fight, it's then that like a log you should remain. I think all these situations are probably familiar. We see this in ourselves and in others. All of these tendencies that he lists there. And he recommends basically, when these tendencies are noticed, stop, freeze. Like a log, you should remain. I think awareness of these tendencies, which will arise. At first, it sounds like just a very, like you wouldn't just be able to function because you'd be constantly guarding yourself, guarding your behavior. You'd be frozen. But I think over time, the tendencies that he lists will become less prominent with that continuing awareness. I noticed that, I was driving up 170 a few days back, and it was rush hour. And I was on an entry ramp with a single lane and a car behind me. I noticed in my rear view mirror was sort of gunning its engine and going from side to side as if it would like to pass me. Now, I tend to drive the speed limit or even a little bit less, even 5 miles per hour less than the speed limit. I've kind of lost my desire for fast driving for some reason. And I find that some people find this really annoying. And that individual apparently did. And ordinarily, when somebody's riding your bumper and sort of making threatening noises with his engine and things like this, it arouses anger. And there may have been some irritation, but the dominant thing that I noticed was curiosity. What's going on in that person's mind? What must it be like to live in that mind right now? What causes and conditions brought about that state of mind where you are desperate to get to speed on an entry ramp and are impatient with someone going the speed limit? It must be miserable to be like that. And I suspect that's not the only time that he's like that. So I think over time, some of these tendencies to react with irritation or anger or whatever the other sort of unwholesome states of mind that can arise do tend to fade away once they're investigated, because you realize how unhelpful and how uncomfortable they are. Another way to look at these teachings of Shantideva in this chapter about attention to mind and the sort of the predecessors of action of body and speech. It's a kind of pre-modern version of cognitive behavioral therapy of just being attentive to the habits of mind so that they can be altered in a way that is more beneficial and causes less distress for yourself and, of course, others as well. Shantideva goes on, with perfect and unyielding faith, with steadfastness, respect, and courtesy, with conscientiousness and awe, work calmly for the happiness of others. Let us not be downcast by the warring wants of childish persons quarreling. Their thoughts are bred from conflict and emotion. Let us understand and treat them lovingly. So here he's talking about witnessing the actions of others that may cause distress just by witnessing them, all this quarreling and warring and carrying on harmful acts. And encourages us to think about, again, the causes and conditions that brought these things about. And arouse in us the essentially compassion. Let us understand and treat them lovingly to the extent that we can. In other words, understand that other people are the victim of causes and conditions, just as we are. And you can either say, well, they're just choosing to act in this way that is harmful. Or you can also wonder to what extent people do have control over their actions, to what extent we are, in fact, the victims of causes and conditions. How much choice in all of this do we really have? I don't think we really know that equation. It's not unusual for instance, someone to have a pattern that seems to be evolving of very bad behavior, what would ordinarily be considered bad behavior, just being, irascible and hard to get along with, only to find out that there's some sort of, they have a degenerative brain problem, or they have, brain tumor, or there's some sort of metabolic disorder that is influencing them. We just really don't know to what extent we have control over our behavior, or other people have control over their behavior. So in that unknowingness, it allows space to be compassionate for others who seem to be acting unskillfully. A bit farther on, Shantideva says, do not, acting inconsiderately, move chairs and furniture so noisily around. Likewise, do not open doors with violence. Take pleasure in the practice of humility. Herons, cats, and burglars achieve what they intend by going silently and unobserved. Such is the constant practice of a sage. Herons, cats, and burglars achieve what they intend by going silently and unobserved. Such is the constant practice of a sage. It's really talking about just not drawing attention to yourself, and also treating things, not only other people, but treating objects with a certain gentleness and care. When you're just moving things around, placing things. It is in accord with the kind of formalities that you would see at a formal Zen center, where everyone is trying to be unobtrusive in their behavior, in their clothing, in their speech or silence. And finally, towards the end, Shantideva says the perfections, and he's referring to the Paramitas, the 6 perfections we talked about. Again, generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. The perfections, giving and the rest, progress in sequence, growing in importance. The great should never be abandoned for the less, and others' good should be regarded as supreme. Therefore, understand this well and always labor for the benefit of beings. The compassionate one farsightedly permits to this end even what has been proscribed. And here he's referring to even what has been proscribed. He's talking about the precepts. Again, this is addressed to monks, monastics. This whole writing is addressed to monastics, but I think it has such obvious practical application for lay people as well, which is why we're studying it. But For a monastic, there are a number of rules. And what he's saying is that under certain circumstances, depending on what's going on, compassion will trump those rules, will take precedence over those rules. There's a story that probably some of you have heard, maybe multiple times, but I'll repeat it. And I always thought, hearing this story, that it referred to a situation that occurred in medieval China or something. But actually, it's a story about a Zen priest in the Meiji period, which was the 19th century when Japan was opening up to the West. And this priest, who was also, I guess, a scholar and taught at the University of Tokyo, was named Tanzan. And Tanzan tells this story about how he and a student of his were walking along in the city, and they encountered this young woman dressed in a silk kimono who wanted to get across the muddy street. It had recently rained, and there was thick mud in the streets, which were not paved. And she was reluctant to walk across the mud in her fine clothing. And Tanzan picked her up and carried her across the street, and then put her down on the other side. The student, the young monk, a few moments later said, "I can't believe you did that. You know, monastics are not supposed to touch women. I can't believe I saw you do that." And Tanzan said to the student, "I put the woman down at the side of the street, but I see that you're still carrying her with you." Sort of an illustration about how dogmatic rules of behavior can sometimes get in the way of doing the right thing, doing what compassion would lead us to do. Of course, we have to be careful because it's possible to be deluded about our motivations, but in this teaching, compassion takes precedence. So this this chapter, which we'll conclude with this session, is about morality, but the big focus is on paying attention to what you're doing, remembering what your aspirations are, remembering what you're trying to do, what direction you're trying to go with your life. It's about taking care of your life. So we'll stop there. I must say I didn't sort of think clearly about what to leave you with in terms of discussion during the breakout rooms. But maybe there are some aspects of this. How practical is this? How much do you engage in this already? Is this just old news, or is it something that we can actually keep in mind and benefit from? So I think we'll stop there and go into breakout rooms, see if there's anything that particularly resonated with you, or it perhaps brought up a situation that you've encountered recently. And we'll get back together in a few moments and discuss as a group. But oh, I do want to make one quick announcement, and that is that next week we are going to do something relatively unprecedented with Heartland Zen, and that is to cancel the session. At the last minute, a family event came up, not a funeral, nothing like that, but it occurs next Saturday, and I'll have to be traveling at that time. Claire, Carol's daughter, suggested that well, just tell them to use the time to do a good deed, to be a bodhisattva, to share the love, and not a bad suggestion. You can keep that in mind around noontime next Saturday. So we'll go into breakout rooms. Thank you very much for being here today.